experience. So um, thank you and welcome to everybody today. We are here to talk about bridging the performance gap, closing critical gaps to build high-performing teams. So I am joined by, my name is Danielle Croft and I'm part of the OG group. I'm sorry, I'm part of Albrick. I work on the commercial side of Albrick. Um, and I'm joined today by Shalin Parmar. Um, so why is this important? So recent research shows that almost 40% of performance issues stem not from capability, but from ambiguity. People simply not knowing what great looks like or how their work links into the bigger picture. Imagine the impact on a business if you could close even half of that gap. That is massive. So to talk about this further, today we're joined by Shalin Parmar, and Shalin is the senior HCM consultant at Albrick. And we're going to explore today practical, actionable ways that organizations can quickly bridge those performance gaps, both the human and the system ones. If we start though, first, I'm not going to go into war and peace about this, but it's good to know who's talking to you, I think. So we start by explaining a little bit about who Albrick are. So Albrick are a management consulting firm that focus on fusion excellence. So they are a team of over 65 consultants, and they all came from the big SIs. And what they realised is when working for those big SIs, that there's a bit of a gap. They worked with lots and lots of, they worked on lots and lots of fusion implementations, and they were experienced across the whole Oracle suite. What they realised is that these implementations got to go live and customers expected to realize the value then at go live. Actually, that's kind of just the start of their journey. So what Albrick wanted to do was focus on helping those existing Oracle customers to realize their investment and get more value out of what they have. So Albrick use a combination of proprietary Oracle built-in tools and their line of business knowledge to examine outcomes based on the people, process, and the technology. So right across the board, creating a holistic picture to show where the bottlenecks are and in what areas customers can easily see some quick ROI. So to set the scene, we want to understand why performance gaps matter. So Shalin, when you look across the organizations you've worked with, what are the most common misconceptions about performance gaps and what actually drives them?
Right. So in my experience, I've one of the major, misconceptions and which shows in the processes are that having yearly evaluations of performance assessments would be enough for us to gauge the performance throughout the year and to evaluate the employee's performance in the right manner. We have seen that across the globe, across industries. This has been the general way of executing performance evaluation. So we think that's a misconception. We need more frequent evaluation. We'll talk more about it, but that's one of the misconceptions majorly that we have seen. And what drives is that performance evaluation is assumed to be a process where we can just sit once in a while and talk about the performance and rate it against whichever scale we have decided. Typically it's around 5 level rating model, right? And we say a person did well or not, and we think that's enough. But that there are a lot of things that come into the picture when we do that just once, and and then that doesn't really give us the accurate picture of the performance evaluation. So though, yeah, this is one of the major misconception that we have seen across in performance management.
So companies are kind of doing that performance review once a year with their employees and expecting that to change everything. But I think what you're saying, Shalin, is they need to do those performance reviews, but they've also got to put things into action, and then they've got to continuously measure that rather than just
Right.
once a year. And it's not a magic ticket.
Absolutely, you're right. Yep.
And why? I mean, that makes sense. That makes absolute sense to me. But so why do these gaps matter now more than ever in the current landscape? And that's from a people, productivity, and business value perspective. What's important about that now?
Right. So, a great question, I think. In general, and the question, the major part I would like to focus on, like you already mentioned in the question, is now. Why now, right? In general, everybody understands that identifying those gaps are important, but now the way the technology is changing, the way our workspaces are changing, specifically things like AI coming into picture, right? Identifying our weaknesses earlier, quicker, and fixing them faster is going to help us grow way better, because if we leave ourselves behind in that part, we may not be able to catch up, because with the advent of tools like AI, and the way it is changing our ability to perform, if we don't identify those gaps and if we don't fix it, somebody else will take advantage of that. And such tools help us perform way better. It just enhances our performance by multifolds. So I think this is one of the most important times for us to identify our performance gaps and fix them as soon as we can, and then take leverage of tools like AI and every other tool that is available to us, and then grow multifold.
So I guess that from what you're saying, with AI, it's kind of twofold. So we need our people to be able to perform
Right.
better to keep up with the advances in AI, but also AI can help us improve that performance as well if we use it in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Because it is a tool which is going to help us do things better. And knowing what we need to improve, it will help us to improve ourselves faster. And what we do well, it will help us to do that even better. So yeah, you very rightly said.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we talked about performance gaps, but and we'll talk a little bit about measuring them in a moment, both from a quantitative side and a qualitative. However, it'd be good to understand from you, what types of performance gaps do you typically see in the companies you work with?
Right. So we'll talk about the exact parts of it. The way we have tried to come up with a framework which helps you identify those gaps. But in general, I would call it, these gaps are typically due to miscommunication or, intent of what we want to do. Uh, Another thing would be how and what we incentivize, and what we actually expect people to deliver. And lastly would be the inability, or identifying the inability quickly, and fixing that. So in general terms, I think this would be the types of gaps that we typically see. And we'll talk more about what those actually are from our perspective, and what we can suggest to, identify those gaps and improve on them.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that leads me nicely into my next question. So, in terms of understanding and measuring the gaps, you and I have spoken before about the power of combining quantitative and qualitative measures. So, from your point of view, what are the top metrics leaders should be tracking to sense check where the gaps are?
Right. So I think from, like you rightly mentioned, qualitative and quantitative perspective, we need to look at both of them. So these are some of the quick metrics we can easily look at, and have a quick sense of how our performance is going, where we need to improve. So I would say qualitative, trend line. Looking at the trend line is one of those qualitative aspects of it. I will still call it qualitative, though we all know it's just generally a rating that we have in the system, or however we do it. But it's a rating given, still quantitative. But at the end of the day, we are putting a number or a rating to a qualitative work, right? So in that sense, I think it's still qualitative. And looking at the trend line can give a very quick glance into where we are headed, right? How is it currently going? You can look at the older data and identify and predict probably that what performance trend will come in the future. So yeah, looking at that can give you a very quick sense check of where we are headed from performance point of view. And some of the quantitative, metrics would be like looking at the attrition rate from a different perspective, looking as we see on screen, top performer versus rest. I'll explain a bit more. But yeah, that a little change in how we look at the data can help you, identify that better. We'll talk about power law, which is, a distribution mechanism of your ratings, how you see them, and how you what to interpret out of it, and looking at revenue per FT, right? So these are some quantitative metrics which can quickly give you a sense of what performance is going on. So quickly talking about the attrition rate, right? So as you can, as I was saying, top performers versus rest. What does that mean, right? So let me quickly explain that. So typically we look at attrition rate in not in context of performance or performance management. So what we suggest is look at your top performers, how many top performers you have, and how are they leaving versus the rest of them. So that will give you a very quick sense of how performance is going on in your organization in general, and their reasons of leaving. That will help you identify the gaps in overall talent that you have in the organization. So that can give you a very good quick sense of how your overall team is, and we need to identify the top performers and try to retain them, for example, right? Then power law. So this is one of the things that I personally, have been suggesting a lot to a lot of my clients, that organizations typically look at performance rating distribution in terms of a bell curve, where we just want to plot a certain rating, certain people in a bell curve, so that it becomes easy for us to identify them as high, medium, and low performance, right? But typically that's not the case, right? That's where the power law comes in. And many of you might have heard it as a Pareto law or 80-20 law, right? This is the similar thing. You let the natural ratings be plotted, and typically you will see it comes out as a power law, which where you see top 20% delivers most of the work, which is typically 80%, and vice versa. So we can see the trend line clearly defining, saying 20% of your top performers are giving you 80% of your output, and then vice versa. So yeah, that becomes very important. And lastly, revenue per FT, right? So this is also a very quick sense check metric where we can see where our revenues are going and how our FT currently that we have contributes to it. So if we, for example, have same amount of FT and revenue is reducing, one of the factors could be that our performance is going down, right? So it just gives you a very quick sense check on where to look at, and then deep dive into it.
That makes sense. And so, from those, they're all really interesting metrics. Which ones do you think are the best sources of truth, and what conversations or feedback tends to reveal what the numbers might miss?
Right. So I think the frequency loops, like you said, the frequency feedback loops, increasing them, that's one of the things. Typically, we do it once in a year, like we just mentioned, increase them and get more data and frequent data so that you identify that your assessments are right. So that's one way of doing it.
Okay, so to dive a little bit deeper into that, I know you've talked to me, and this was a new one on me, Shallon, but you've talked to me at length about the 3 I's framework. So
Right.
if we can bring it to life a little bit using the framework, if we start with intent, what are the early warning signs that employees and managers don't share the understanding of what success looks like, and there's a mismatch there?
Right. So let me, dive deep into that directly. So yeah, and like you rightly said, and that's where the one of the answers is, right? To see how the employees feel they are performing in versus managers see that they're performing. Just finding the discrepancy, how frequent that happens and what is the level of discrepancy will give you a direct insight on how what message is passed and how is it received. So that gives away directly the this gap in intent. And
Can I just
like
clarify on that? Sorry, Shelley.
yeah.
Do you mean when they have a performance review, if one scores up differently to the other very often, very frequently? Okay, yeah, that's
Right.
great. Thanks. Just for my understanding.
No, fair. Yeah, that's a good question, right? So yeah, just a little more on top of that. So typically, you will, we'll see this class as a classic case where an employee says, "I performed very well. I probably did more than what was expected," and the manager would say, "No, you did just well enough. It was sufficient, but not as much as you think," and it could be the other way as well. So yeah, like you rightly said, employees saying, giving themselves, for example, 5 stars to themselves, and managers saying, no, it was just 3. So that gap clearly tells us that there's some discrepancy, and it could be either way. The communication of what we want to do as an organization, as a team, was not probably rightly passed by the manager, or it was not probably received by the employee. So it could be the either case. But looking at those discrepancies can quickly give us an insight on the intent in gap.
And I guess that's important because as people, we have different perspectives. We all have very different perspectives, don't we? So knowing how to identify that and then how to address it in the right way is important. Some of us will always think we're doing worse than we are and probably need a little bit of G'ing up. And some of us will think that we're doing a lot better than we are, and probably need a little bit of a reality check. So I think that's a good thing to identify. So the other
Exactly.
two I's are incentive and inability. In terms of incentive, we all know that they're really powerful, for better or worse. So how do businesses unintentionally create performance friction through the way these goals, rewards, or recognition are structured, Shallon?
Right. Great question. So, um, typically, like you said, incentives can be very powerful. And what we as an organization give away as an incentive versus what we actually expect to be delivered is where the gap starts. So, for example, most of us at this time in our compensation will have some form of variable pay, and up to some extent, many organizations put a lot of emphasis on the variable pay. The conditions to get that variable pay are typically very deadline driven, deliverables driven, which is generally tightly time bound, and then cost wise as well, based on the cost of delivery and time of delivery. While we expect them to perform, to deliver content of best quality, come up with some, out of the box solutions, out of the box ways to do certain things. This is sometimes we expect, but the incentive that we provide them, it does not align with that, right? So we want things done fast, but we also want things done to be in the best of quality. But typically need to give time to people to to be able to deliver with best quality. So that creates that friction. And what we suggest is to look at, as an organization, go deep into the roots of what the vision is, what's good for us in the long term, and balance out the incentives, the awards and payouts in a way that it aligns with long-term growth of the organization and also the employee. We get sufficient time to deliver with quality, and also on the time. So we definitely have to balance out on those two aspects.
So I guess what you're saying is you need to align the incentives and the way we manage people by what we want back from them. So if you've got people who you want to be really creative and think outside the box, putting really tight timescales on them stunts that
Right.
creativity. Yeah. And also if you want to drive somebody to a certain type of behavior toward a certain type of behavior, then we need to make sure the incentives in line with that, which sounds really simple, but I know personally working in many organizations, quite often the incentive isn't aligned with what the business goals are, and that needs to be reviewed frequently in order to keep those in line as well. So that's a great insight. And then finally, the last of the I's is inability. So when it comes to capability, what are the early signs that someone's struggling? And outside of the performance reviews that we've talked about.
So typically, just goes back to one of the points that we mentioned earlier. One of the early signs or sense we can get is from the performance decline trend. So we can look at their performance data, how they have done over time. That will give us, ability, insight in how they're tracking well. And just to add a bit more perspective on what we mean by ability, it's just not about what skill sets they have, right? It's also about seeing whether the skill sets match to the role that we have assigned them. Are we giving them the right support? Are they the right place to deliver the right performance that we want from them, right? So checking, for example, if somebody has been working on the same position for a long time and their performance have started to decline, it probably shows demotivation, right? That they are not, if they didn't get a promotion, for example, and they are not motivated enough, or they are frequently, they are given frequently different assignments, and their performance goes down. So that again could be a sign saying, the roles we have assigned to them do not align with their skill set, so that can lead to a decline. So we need to look at the performance decline and just identify those gaps from there, and then it is just one of the quick measures to do that, right? We can dive deeper into using the data and look at how the trend goes, right? So these days, as I was mentioning earlier, AI has come through and it gives us a lot of insights from the data, so you can utilize AI to do that. Since from our background, we are from Oracle HCM space, right? So Oracle, for example, has also come up with a lot of AI features that can help you identify that. So utilize those things and find the performance declines. Right? And one
And
of
I
the
guess
other,
outside of the
yeah,
performance reviews as well, it's about looking at, as per your slides there, it's about looking at kind of the more emotional side as well. So with the employee surveys, is that I guess that adds in, because the performance reviews is kind of the data side, whereas
right.
the surveys is more of the human side.
Exactly, and you're absolutely right about that. So surveying of how the employees feel, what their sentiments are, will also give a really quick insight in terms of in an early sign that their performance might decline over time. They might be feeling burnt out. They might feel that they are not in the right position, and any of the sentiment, any of the feedback that they have. Let's collect that as soon as possible and act on it, right? So it's about identifying the gaps early and fixing those gaps early. So yeah, surveying definitely is the one of the qualitative side, the emotional side in identifying the inability. And like I said, inability could be just mismatch of skill sets and the roles, and to improve these things, right? So I think we've sort of talked about it on a very high level, but how learnings are given to the employees, that is one of the ways we can identify, we can improve those gaps. We improve on those gaps once we have identified that somebody lacks in a certain skill set which is required for their current role. Let's align those learnings, but measure them as well. Get constant feedback, which is a recurring theme everywhere. Even with learning management tied to your performance, get the feedback of the learning and see how that helped the employee to perform better.
So
Again, the
rather
idea
than
says,
just So
yeah,
rather than just provide, sorry to interrupt, Shalyn, but I'm
no,
just
no, yeah,
clarifying it in my head. So rather than just providing them some learning, some training, and telling them they have to do this, is then checking in afterwards, seeing how they found the learning and how, you know, how easy, how hard was it, and actually, do they think it's improved their ability to do the role? All of those soft things around the learning. Is that correct?
that's exactly right. Yep, exactly. Right. And then on top of that, just adding one more point lastly about, in context of succession planning. So once we have identified the right talent, uh, let's plot a career trajectory for them. Let's identify inability as an organization where we need somebody to take up a certain position at a point of time, right? So let's plan for that succession and then use these gaps to, to prepare them for that particular role. So improving your succession planning will also, drastically change the overall performance as an organization.
And I guess that can also affect performance of teams, because succession planning enables people to realize that they have a path, they have a focus. I mean, as human beings, we all know that we're all goal oriented, or most of us are goal orientated.
Right.
And it makes us feel valued, because it shows that the organization value us and want to take us on a journey, and rather than us not knowing where we stand. So for some people at least, that's going to be a bonus, and that's going to improve their performance by
Exactly.
default.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Absolutely
So
right. And just, I'm sorry, I just wanted to add one more quick pointer on top of that, because I think we talked about it earlier, and that really shows up how we can do it in a very quick way, right? So as leaders, eventually we realized somebody helped us giving a career path. They understood what we need to improve, and gave us that motivation. So as the leadership, you can just quickly see, identify those right people and increase their ability, and like you rightly said, motivate them, boost their morale, and then have in turn a workforce that is very goal driven, very motivated, and ready to perform better every day.
I think again that's a really good point, Shalin, because as leaders, it's about thinking about how we would want to be treated. So, thinking about the
Right.
things that we would want in a role, not assuming that everybody else has the same experience or the same outlook, but just using that human side again to think about, because that's we're in the business of human human resources, aren't we? So that's
Resources.
yeah,
Exactly.
it makes sense. And so that's all really great. And I think the thing for me, Shallon, that would bring it to life is to understand a little bit more about your experience. So because I think quite often that for me, that brings it to life in my head if I understand where you've done this before. So if you could
Right.
tell me about one customer story that gives us an idea of the impact that you've made by closing performance gaps within a team.
Right, sure, and I'd love to share this experience. So this happened not too long ago, a couple of years ago only. I was working with one of the clients in Philippines, and we were, it was a small journey that we went through when we were designing the performance evaluation process, right? So one of the things we did was to change the rating model, which sounded very simple, very small, but it had, huge effect on the overall, you know performance process, and also to identify the performance gaps. So how did that happen? So earlier they used to have a 5 level rating scale, which is very typical, of any organization. So and the problem with that kind of rating model is that people generally tend to choose the middle path, where they don't want to, take a very hard stand on and say everybody, most of the people perform on average. They did just sort of met the expectation and things like that. So that just corrupts our data in a way, right? We want to identify how well a certain person did, and what was the degree of that performance. So we broke it down to 4 levels instead. We distributed it in a way that the manager will have to say whether they did well and how well. If they did bad, how badly. So that made them choose on which side the employee lies in terms of performance. So that straight away gave us the very first insight of the gaps in performance, and that led to a very very good qualitative change in the process. So we were able to eventually, at the end of the process, when the evaluation started, we were able to identify more good performance, well performance, and if I remember the numbers correctly, that increased by 40%. Earlier, uh, identifying top performers or the right talent was difficult, but now this made it 40% faster and easier for us to identify that. And eventually, because we found out the right talent and they were rewarded accordingly, which is in turn goes back to incentiving congruence, right? We made sure they are awarded properly, and that increase the retention. So that if I and then the retention rate, increased by 10%. The attrition rate went down. So that had a huge impact. And we combined our knowledge of the system, how to do that in Oracle, for example, and using our experience as SCM consultants. We suggested these changes. We put in the measures to gauge the ratings, analyze them through, reporting and data analysis. And we were able to achieve this. And it was a really nice experience to do that.
I mean, that sounds like a really simple change, which you've identified, but it's only simple if you know it, isn't it? So you moved from basically a 5 point scoring model to a 4 point scoring model. So nobody could
Right.
just sit in the middle all of the time. Because I guess it's
Right.
really easy to identify your top performers and your worst performers, but it's those
Right.
ones in the middle. That's the ones, those are the ones that you find it difficult to decide who's decent and who's not so decent, maybe. And so by
Right.
making that simple change, you've made great difference to the quality of the data that you get from those performance reviews. I think you said, 40%, you've made it 40% quicker to identify, which, that's a massive change for an organization, I'd imagine. So that's a really great story. Thank you, Shalin, for that. So
Yeah.
we've talked about the practical steps organizations can take, and that's that we've talked about the quick wins, but Orbrick also has a suite of services and tools that helps your customers go further and maintain a culture of continuous improvement. Could you give us a high level look at how that works in practice?
Right. So in context of, let's say, finding performance gaps, right? So we as an organization will go with such an approach where we use our tools like foresight, second sight, and hindsight. So I'll tell you how that can help, right? So foresight, for example, gives you a very quick sneak peek into how your certain outcomes are doing well. Right. In this case, it is decreasing the performance gaps or identifying the performance gaps, right? So foresight as a tool will help you identify the gaps and at what degree do we stand, right? And second side is our value realization program where we use AI, our business expertise as consultants. We use process mining and lot more other tools which help us at pinpoint the areas which are the gaps, right? And help design a plan for it. So once we are done with the second side, we know what the culprits are in the process, right? We identify what we need to improve, and then we have hindsight, which is again an AI powered tool where we continuously measure those let's call them metrics or the areas of improvement, right? So we have an intervention point, and after that you can gauge how well that change, what was the degree of change, and you can do it by yourself. So yeah, hindsight, second sight, and foresight are some of the tools which can help you do that. And we also, as an organization, provide managed services where which could be of similar nature, like I mentioned, where we as consultants come into in organization and help you tweak your systems in a certain way which aligns with your outcome. In that case would be reducing the performance gaps, right? So we with our expertise of the systems, we make certain changes to the system and align it to your outcomes. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll summarize a little bit if that's all right, Shalin, just because that's
Yeah.
quite a lot of information
Yeah.
and a lot of services. So I think from my point of view, having worked with you for a while now, the key elements to your service are foresight, which looks over all of your Oracle estate, and that's across HCM, ERP, CX. It
Right.
can look at all of those. That's a high level look at your estate and how it's working and what the process issues might be and where the best areas are for
Right.
ROI. But that's all AI driven. It is just system based, and you just need your instance details to put in there and it'll give you that insight. Then moving on from that in a more detailed way, you use second sight, which is the more detailed value realization program, but that's human led. So you've got
Right.
65 consultants who've got many years of implementations, and they use a combination of tools. So your own AI proprietary tools, Oracle's tools, and process mining to bring the data, but also to speak to the people. So they're looking at people, process, and technology to give a holistic view and give you a strategic solution to fixing any problems, but also to giving you the best return on investment. So that's the middle bit. And then the end bit, when we're looking at these things, but also you guys can fix those problems as well. Once you've identified those problems, you can you can fix them as well because you've got all that knowledge. And then finally, you've got hindsight, which you then leave in. So that's a software you then leave in, and it's self-service for the customer. And it shows whether you've actually delivered the return on investment, whether the changes you've made have been successful, which is absolutely gold dust. So between second sight actually not only identifies the changes, but in that middle bit, it also tells you what return on investment you would get if you made those changes. And then hindsight identifies whether you've actually delivered those and whether you're getting that return on investment. And you guys stick around to make sure that is delivered, don't you? And
Yeah, absolutely.
And if it isn't, then you change things. So those are the main three when we're looking at the continuous improvement that we're talking about now. But then to add into that, you use your value realization and your continuous improvement in your managed services and in your implementation services. So that's the evolve and the purpose. You use these services that the one-off services in your BAU services as well,
Right.
which is to enhance what you offer for clients and to make sure that implementations are done properly as well. Around that, there's a couple of other tools, which is Aubrey AI, which is kind of co-pilot for Oracle, which is an add-in tool, and Smart Close and Smart Usage. So the Smart Close is all about AI-powered intelligence for your financial close, so shaving time off your close, which everybody wants to do, don't they, in finance? And then Smart Usage, which is all about tracking, analysing and optimising your Oracle license consumption across your whole business, so we can help with that. So that's just an overview of the things that Aubrey can do. If the people listening right now are interested, what would you suggest moving forward?
Right. So I think one of the first things I would suggest is to get in touch with Danielle. She can help you with, having a quick assessment done for you. We also have a quick 7-minute assessment on our website, which can help you quickly gauge what's the maturity level of your ERP. But if you want to dive further, you can connect with Danielle, and she can help you set up, initial assessment and review of your business from different perspective. So yeah, I would say reach out.
Perfect, Sean. And I'm more than happy to take questions or have a quick call with anybody. So we'll open up now for questions. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions. I don't think we've got any. So that's probably all that's left for me to say is to thank everybody for their time and to say that we've included a QR code here for you to take the 7-minute ERP maturity self-assessment that Charlene mentioned. So that is just a free survey, and that goes through onto our website, and that'll get you started. But further to that, we're happy to offer a POC on one of the outcomes for anybody in HCM, anybody who's facing these performance gaps. So feel free to reach out to me and we can have a quick chat and work out what the best thing is to do for you to identify your performance gaps. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Charlene, for taking part. It's been really valuable and really insightful. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for your time as well.